welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. I want to wish all the mothers out there a very happy Mother's Day. We've got a very powerful show coming right up with special guest Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she's here to talk to us about her new book, How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain. Now, Dr. Barrett is a University Distinguished Professor of Psychology at Northeastern University with appointments at Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital in psychiatry and radiology. She received a National Institute of Health Directors Pioneer Award for her groundbreaking research on emotion in the brain and is an elected member of the Royal Society of Canada. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Oh, what a pleasure it is to have you here, and what a fabulous book. I mean, once I picked it up, I could not put it down. It is filled with so much, it's got such great information that, you just have to sit there and go, wait a minute, but it makes sense.
Thanks so much. I'm delighted to hear that you found it interesting and engaging.
No, it was absolutely engaging, and I could also see, you have a TED Talk with over 1 million views, and I highly encourage everyone not only pick up your book, but also watch that. And it really kind of gives this visual to where people can really understand what you're talking about as well.
Yes, there are some of the things we talk about emotion, some of the things I discuss in my book are very counterintuitive, and so a couple of illustrations, a couple of examples that really allow you to experience what I'm talking about I think are really helpful for people.
Yeah, it really could put things together. And so for our listeners, why don't you share with us what emotions are? Because I think there's a lot of, and I didn't know, and I think a lot of people are confused about what that's all about.
Well, I think the thing to realize is that for several millennia at this point, really since the time of ancient Greece, people have made certain assumptions about what emotions are that come from directly our own experience. So in much the same way that people used to believe that the sun revolved around the earth because, that's how it looks to the naked eye, right? The sun rises in the east, it moves across the sky, it sets in the west. It seems to us, based on our own experiences, that the sun is revolving around the earth. And until we had very special technology that we could use to, telescopes that we could use to look at the solar system more directly, we had to kind of go with our own experiences as a guide for what's out there in the world. And similarly, for a very, very long time, people have gone with their experiences as a guide to what emotions are and how they work. So, when an emotion occurs, when you get angry, when you get afraid, when you get happy, it feels like it's, something just happened to you, like a little bomb just went off, inside your body and causes you to feel and do and say things that you might otherwise not. And so this idea has been around for a super long time. It was the dominant scientific view, and it still remains a very popular view. It's embedded in our legal system. It's the whole idea that, the human mind is a battleground for rationality versus emotion. That idea is, in the law and in economics and in almost in every domain that touches our lives. But emotions don't work that way. So our experiences of how things work don't really tell us what's going on under the hood. And that's a much more interesting but also much more counterintuitive story.
It really is, because a lot of times you're so right. When these emotions come up, we just feel like they're kind of driving the bus. They take over. And from your research, it says a lot of different things about what our emotions are all about.
Yeah, well, in the book, I should point out that I'm certainly talking about my own research. In my lab, we've been studying emotion for the last 25 years. But in the book, I'm also summarizing a lot of research from a lot of other scientists as well. And one of the most important points to make here is that in science, when we say that something is a theory, what we mean by that, so when I talk about, the theory of emotion that I discuss in my book, what we're talking about here are a set of ideas that are backed up by decades of evidence from many different domains of science. And so in my book, I'm certainly talking a lot about neuroscience and physiology, and of course psychology, but we also discuss in the book evidence from developmental science, from cultural anthropology, from sociology, even from economics, and there's a chapter on the law. So there's a broad range of evidence from many different disciplines that show us that, emotions may feel like they're happening to us, but they're actually made by us. Your brain makes every emotion that you feel and makes it on the fly as you need it. And knowing that and understanding the science behind what your brain is actually doing helps you get a handle on your life, I think, your emotional life.
Mm-hmm. And that was what I found to be so surprising and interesting to me. I mean, this is all new information to me where, people have really kind of, their brains are guessing kind of not only what emotion to have, but what other emotions people are having.
Absolutely. So I think one of the most important discoveries in the last decade in neuroscience is that your brain is not a reactive organ. When you feel happy or sad or angry, or when you see someone else as happy or sad or angry, it's not because your brain is reacting to things that are happening in the world. Your brain is predicting all the time. It's constantly guessing what's going to happen next, and those guesses are the basis of every emotion, every thought, every perception that you have, every action that you take. And the really interesting thing is that this is happening completely outside of your awareness pretty much all the time.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're getting involved in emotions and doing your research for this, what from the very beginning for you had you so inspired to kind of follow this path?
Well, I didn't set out to change, to turn a whole scientific discipline on its head and initiate a paradigm shift. That wasn't my goal. It's really hard to make a career in science when you're disagreeing with all of your colleagues. So, but when I was in graduate school, I had run a series of experiments that didn't replicate published work. And I couldn't, figure out what the problem was. I ran 8 experiments in 3 years, and every single one of them failed. And I started thinking, I'm probably not cut out to be a scientist, maybe. When I looked closely at my data, what I realized is the problem was that the measurements of emotion, the measures of emotion, were not functioning the way that they were supposed to according to the dominant view of the time, which I call the classical view of emotion. This idea that your brain, you're born with a brain that has emotion circuits kind of baked in already, pre-wired to feel, with a circuit for fear and happiness and anger and so on. And so I thought, I was asking people how they felt, and people were not distinguishing between emotional experiences that they should, according to the ideas of the time, that they should have been able to tell the difference between. So I thought that I would be, it would just be really simple. I could just measure emotions objectively. I could measure someone's facial movements, their expressions of emotion on the face, because, everyone knows that Darwin said that emotions have their own distinctive universal expression on the face. So you scowl when you're angry, you smile when you're happy, you frown when you're sad, And I could also measure emotions, I thought, by measuring people's physical changes in their body, because everyone knows the great William James, father of American psychology, said that every emotion has its own bodily fingerprint. And so I went to the literature and I started to read, and it turns out that it's much more interesting than that. In fact, there are no facial expressions for any that are diagnostic of any emotion. You scowl sometimes when you're angry, but you also scowl when you're sad, and you also scowl when you are just paying attention to something. So people smile when they're sad, they cry when they're angry, they scream when they're happy. And you see the same kind of variability also when you observe or measure what's going on inside people's bodies or what their actions are. So, people can tremble in fear, jump in fear, freeze in fear, scream in fear, hide in fear, attack in fear, even laugh in the face of fear. And so when it comes to emotion, variety is the norm. And then it turns out that, people have largely misunderstood Darwin, and Darwin, even when it comes to emotion, Darwin actually contradicted himself. Contradicted his major insights that he wrote about in On the Origin of Species. So there's a really interesting story there. And William James never said that there was a single emotion pattern for each, single physical pattern for each emotion. So I just got really interested to understand, why would it be that textbooks and many scientific papers would be making claims that are not supported by the data? Why would some of our most famous and honored scientists be misquoted or misunderstood or even contradict themselves? And eventually, when I moved to studying the brain, I realized that the findings there were exactly the same as in when you're measuring the face and the body. When it comes to emotion, variation is the norm. So emotions are not built into your brain at birth, and there is no single fingerprint or pattern for each emotion. Emotions don't shine forth from the face. They don't. They're not broadcast by the changes in your body's inner systems. They don't come from a specific part of the brain, and no scientific innovation is going to miraculously reveal the biological fingerprint of any emotion. And for me, that was a really interesting puzzle, right? I mean, why? Mm-hmm. How is it that you and we have these experiences, but scientists don't know what caused them? How is it that you can look at someone's face and know how they feel, make a guess at how they feel? And, you're not right all the time, but you are right probably a lot of the time. And how does that happen? So how does it happen if emotions don't come pre-wired? How is it that our brains are making emotion and perceiving emotion in other people? I just thought this was a really interesting puzzle. And after 25 years, the conclusion that I came to is that, our emotions aren't built in waiting to be revealed. They're made by us as we need them. We don't recognize emotions or identify emotions. We construct our own emotional experiences and our perceptions of other people's emotions on the spot through a complex interplay of systems in a brain that is wired to be guessing and making predictions. So, we are not at the mercy of mythical emotion circuits that are buried deep inside some animalistic part of our brains. We are largely the architects of our own experience. Our brains are wired in a particular way to create emotions as we need them. And once you understand how that works, you're in a very good position to take more control over your emotional life.
Well, is that the main kind of goal when people learn about emotions and they realize that what we're doing is really, at the very best, like guessing what other people are feeling? It's really so that we have a better understanding on how to interact with one another?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, to us, the way it feels, typically is as if we're reading people's emotions on the faces the way that we would read words on a page. But really what's happening is that your brain is guessing, and it's guessing about how someone feels and what they might do next based on a whole lot of information, and not just what's on the face, but also what's on the body, what their bodies are doing, what the situation that you're in, what just happened a moment ago. So your brain is like it's what scientists call a statistical learner. It's learning patterns. And those patterns become wired into the brain, and so that your brain can kind of reconstitute them, remake them, kind of remember them as needed. And so your past experiences kind of seed your brain with these patterns to be able to predict what's going to happen next in the immediate future. And those guesses sometimes result in an emotion.
I really love the example that you used in your TED Talk, where you talked about the Boston Marathon bomber and how the jury was feeling a certain way in regards to his supposed emotions that he was displaying or not. And I think that was such a great example because it really, the way you broke it down, made it very simple for people to say, okay, well, we really don't understand what emotion a person's trying to portray. And from a jury standpoint, they really have no way of guessing.
Well, in the American legal system, there's an assumption that you have to be able to know the hearts and mind of a defendant in order for that defendant to get a fair trial. So you have to be able to detect whether that person feels guilty or remorseful for their actions. And in the case that I was talking about in my TED Talk, I was talking about the case of the Boston bomber, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, which for me was an interesting experience because, my lab is about a mile from the bomb site, and Tsarnaev himself was caught just a couple miles from my house after, my family and everybody else in Boston had been in a lockdown situation for several days. And so, and it was, particularly horrible what his crimes were. And, but as a scientist, as a person, I was, frightened and I felt horrible for the people who had been harmed. And it was a time of great, stress and sadness and, grief for people in Boston. But at the same time, as a scientist, it's interesting to me that that the idea of getting a fair trial requires that jurors read emotions in the defendant. And in particular, in capital cases where a jury has to decide between life in prison and the death penalty, which was the case in the Tsarnaev case, the research shows that the choice largely rests on whether the jury believes that the defendant feels remorse. Now, in Tsarnaev's case, he spoke words of apology at the time of the trial, but he didn't express remorse in an American way. He didn't cry. He didn't look aggrieved. He didn't look guilty. In the way that we would think of as the stereotype of expressing guilt. And the jury sentenced him to death. The thing is that the American way of expressing guilt that you see first of all, there isn't a single way. People express guilt in many ways, but the stereotype way of expressing guilt in the United States is not universal. And in fact, Tsarnaev was, he was very stoic during his trial, which is actually consistent for somebody from his culture when you are admitting defeat to an enemy who's bested you. You are stoic. That's an appropriate. That's the way that you show honor to your opponent, really. So it's disrespectful to your opponent to cry and make a lot of fuss, and it's the respectful thing to do is to be stoic. And so, because he comes from a Chechen culture, which is a culture of honor, and the rules for expressing are just different. And so, it was this tricky thing of realizing that he's guilty and should be punished, but also realizing that that people were judging him using a set of assumptions about emotion that were probably not correct. And this is a problem in the legal system, but it's also a problem in many other domains of life. For example, the TSA in the United States spent almost $1 billion training security agents to read people's facial movements and body postures to detect threat, and it turned out that the whole approach had no validity. There were congressional hearings about it and so on and so forth. And if the government had asked the scientists who study this, that we could have told them that we sort of colloquially speak about body language, but body movements are not a language that you read unambiguously the way that you read words on a page. It just doesn't work that way. Your brain is guessing. It's doing its best to make guesses, but those guesses are often wrong.
Mm-hmm. You're so eloquent in how you explained all that, and I appreciate you taking the time to kind of break that down for us, because when we look at, especially with like the Boston Marathon bombers case, and regardless, what he did was horrible, and obviously that needed to be punished. But when we look at it from a scientific perspective and bring into some of the facts in regards to can jurors read people, I mean, you really map that out for us very well, so that there's an understanding on that front as well, and from a judicial system, how they may need to revisit how that's done, because there are some major differences there. And this kind of all leads me to my next question. So is there a way for us to master our emotions?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question that it's possible. It's just that usually when people give advice in books or in television shows or in magazines about mastering your emotion, they're usually giving you some suggestions for how to conquer your emotions in the moment. And that's the hardest time to try to change how you feel. I mean, we have much more control over what we feel than people usually think. But that doesn't mean that we can just snap our fingers and choose how we feel. Changing how you feel in the moment is very effortful and very, very challenging. That being said, once you know what the ingredients are that your brain is using to make emotion, if you change those ingredients, then you change your emotional life. So one example is to keep yourself relatively healthy. What do I mean by that? Well, it turns out that your brain didn't evolve, so that you could think or have emotions or perceive and see things in the world. We value thinking, and so that makes us believe that our brains evolved to think. But actually, your brain evolved to control the systems of your body. So the way that I explain in the book is that your brain is basically running like a budget for your body. You have a lot of systems in your body, systems for water, for breathing, for salts, for glucose, which is the chemical that, that we use for energy. And all of these systems have to be kept in balance. Your brain, if your brain is going to stand you up, it has to raise your blood pressure before you stand up to make sure that the oxygen makes it to your brain. Otherwise, you'll faint, which is very costly. And so your brain's basically kind of running a budget. It's trying to figure out what it's going to spend and what revenues need to be replenished and so on. Just in the same way that a financial office would run a budget for a large company. And as long as your body budget is solvent, as long as you get enough sleep and you eat properly and you avoid pseudo foods that don't provide sufficient energy, and you get enough exercise, then your brain, barring illness, your brain can keep your body budget solvent, and you'll feel, you won't feel wretched, you won't feel unpleasant most of the time. However, if you start running a deficit, let's say you don't sleep enough, or you have a lot of stress at work, or you aren't eating properly or getting enough exercise, then your body budget will start to run a deficit. And the way you experience that, you don't experience the actual sensations in your body. What you experience is feeling unpleasant, uncomfortable, feeling distressed, or really miserable. So that's one of the basic ingredients that your brain uses to make emotions. When you're feeling miserable because your body budget is unbalanced, it's just easier for your brain to make a lot of negative emotion. Now, not all unpleasantness means that something is wrong. When your brain is kind of getting you ready to spend a lot of your budget, like when you're going to exercise, for example, or take a test or do something hard, you can, that kind of getting ready for that kind of effort can feel unpleasant, but it's a temporary unpleasantness, and that kind of stress is actually really good for your body to learn how to go into the red and then replenish what it needs and kind of balance itself. It's that prolonged kind of stress on your body budget that is really harmful. And so, believe it or not, I know I sound like a mother when I say this, but I'm actually speaking as a neuroscientist. Actually, if you get enough sleep, that's like the one thing people would say to me, if there's one thing I can do to change my emotional life, what would it be? And I would say, get enough sleep. It's actually remarkable how much it changes your emotional life. So one ingredient, are the sensations coming from your body. That's what your brain is using to make emotions. And so you can change what those are, making it easier for your body budget to be in balance. Another thing that your brain uses to make emotion is the situation. So when your brain is making emotion, it's linking the sensations in your body to the world, trying to make sense of what those sensations mean. And so another ingredient in making emotion is the situation that you're in. And so if you want to change your emotions, you can just change situations. Just go for a walk, go for a run. Or if you can't physically move, you can figuratively change your situation or your context by paying attention to different things in the situation. That's what we call being mindful. So being mindful is paying attention to details in the immediate situation that you're in that you were ignoring before, and those are an opportunity to make new emotions. And then the third ingredient, when your brain, I said your brain is making emotions by linking your sensations from your body that come from that body budgeting to the situation, that linking happens as your brain makes predictions. It's using past experience. It's saying, well, the last time that I was in a situation like this and my body felt like this, what happened next? What kind of an emotion was it? And then your brain makes an instance of emotion that is similar to the past. And so if it's the case that your past experiences are also a kind of an ingredient that your brain uses, then you can change your experiences in the moment to seed your brain to predict differently in the future. So you can cultivate new experiences for yourself in the moment when you have a little bit of energy, because that these will become wired into your brain, and they become the past experiences that your brain then uses to make predictions in the future. So one example I like to give is, people keep gratitude diaries, for example, to make sure that they are tracking and emphasizing instances of gratitude. So their brain learns to make instances of gratitude really kind of automatically because they've practiced it so much. And gratitude is a really useful emotion that there's a number of ways in which gratitude can be really helpful to your life. And that I talk about some of them in my book, and there are other recently published books that also talk about the value of positive emotions like compassion and gratitude. Another one that I like is awe, the emotion of awe, which I also discuss in my book. But, you can cultivate new experiences in the moment that feed your brain so that you'll predict differently in the future. And so the control that you have over your brain isn't always in the moment, right? I mean, the control that you have over making emotions isn't always in the moment. The horizon of control is much broader than how you feel in the particular moment. So the whole point of the book is to basically say, look, emotions are part of the biological makeup of your brain and your body. But not because you have dedicated circuits for each one that you have to kind of wrestle into the ground. You experience your emotions without conscious effort, but it's not because, you're a passive recipient of some experience that got triggered somewhere deep inside your brain. You have the capacity. Your brain is always making emotion out of a set of ingredients. It's doing it pretty automatically. And if you learn what those ingredients are and you learn how to change them, then you have much more control over your emotional life than you did before.
I think that that's just absolutely fascinating. And I'm so glad that you have made it your life's passion to dive into this topic, because there's so much that the layperson can learn from this. And that's why your book is such just a valuable resource, in my opinion, because we can read this and it allows you, like how you're saying, to be more kind of in control in some ways in regards to not only what you're feeling and how you're feeling, and you're kind of asking the questions, kind of where am I with this, but also what you're perceiving and kind of remap the brain in regards to what's going on there.
Thanks so much. Well, it's the response to the book has been overwhelming. It's been very gratifying as a scientist. I'm still receiving emails on a daily basis from people who are telling me how the book really changed their lives. And as a scientist, it's just fantastic to know that the work that you do can impact people's lives in a really important and potent way.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is, for sure, without a doubt. Well, and I mean, we can talk about this topic all day long, but of course we want our listeners to go out and buy your book, How Emotions Are Made, and of course visit your website. And where can people go to learn more about the work that you're doing and be part of your community?
Well, my website is my name, LisaFeldmanBarrett.com. It's all one word. And on that site, people can they'll learn about the book and how to purchase it if they're interested. There are also articles and podcast recordings and videos and also some blog posts about particular topics. So what I've done is kind of elaborated or broken down some of the more complex scientific ideas into sort of simpler, more bite-sized, accessible pieces. And then, of course, I also have an academic website which has all of my papers. Something like I think at this point my lab has published over 200 peer-reviewed papers, but those are very technical. The more accessible articles that I've written for the New York Times and other magazines and newspapers can be, you can access them on my website, LisaFeldmanBarrett.com.
Oh, well, Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us today. Of course, sharing your wisdom, but also your book, How Emotions Are Made. We so greatly appreciate you being here with us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It's been such a joy to spend this time with you. Again, for our listeners that are looking to connect with you, they can do that at LisaFeldmanBarrett.com. We are at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.